Hey everyone, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. Despite all of the complications Russian military is having, they're still going all in on many parts of the front line. And I'm constantly getting asked, does this mean that the Russian army cannot be stopped and will not be stopped? And the answer to that is absolutely no. What we need to understand is Russia is a pretend state, and what they're doing a lot of times is playing pretend. Optics and positioning for Putin oftentimes is more important. There is an event you might have heard of that's going to happen very, very soon that Russia would really want to influence, which is the election in the United States. And we already know that this was the Russian plan beforehand. It was the idea of Russians to show that specifically that Russia is not stopping and cannot be stopped. Unfortunately for Russia, Ukrainian success in a Kursk region divided by two all of those efforts, and now their position doesn't really look as strong. But they're still trying, and they're not going to stop trying until the elections have passed. Now, on one side, there is indeed a problem that the Russians are advancing on the Ukrainian front line, specifically around Pokrovsk area. And there are valid discussion to be had about what's actually happening and how is this a problem. The problem is that while we, for example, on YouTube and many other media can show the map with the arrows and explain what's happening, what we don't show oftentimes is at what cost. We do not show that there has been basically videos from different areas where there's like a path of road filmed from a drones, and there is more blown up equipment and dead bodies of Russians littering that road than the pavement itself. We cannot show the scale to which this is unsustainable for Russia. And I want to give a shout out to Dylan. Now, Dylan is an amazing guy, absolutely incredible. If you haven't watched Dylan, he's great for what he's doing. He's getting good reports. He's making documentary videos. He's talking with Ukrainians. Tremendous guy. Amazing. So this is not a stone in his garden. This is just for illustrative purposes, right? So a lot of the talking points that we might see are something along these lines. For example, sound the alarm. The situation in Ukraine is critical. Again, this is not to push on Dylan, but those kind of articles, like that narrative that's like, everything is bad, is getting picked up by the Russian propaganda and then spread out like this is indeed what is happening, that is indeed means that Russia is totally winning and there is nothing Ukraine can do. The truth is much different. And I want to point here to one of the sergeants from the Ukrainian armed forces. It's always difficult to find representative in the Ukrainian armed forces, specifically on the front line, that is able to zoom out, to get away from that picture on the ground and think about the situation on the ground more strategically. What does it actually mean? Thankfully, this person right over here, Sergeant Sazonov, he is really, really good at it. And he explains this very, very clearly. So I'm going to read you this text and I'm going to show you on the map with my comments. It's going to take a bit, but bear with me. So he writes, friends, as promised briefly about the situation on Donetsk situation. Let's start with the most difficult, the Pokrovsk direction. Everything is really bad there, and the issue of capturing Seredova can really be considered closed. Karadag and other brigades really did the impossible, and instead of 2 days, the enemy spent several weeks on assaults, was forced to stop moving towards Pokrovsk and concentrate everything they had near Seledova. An army corps plus a tank brigade, I do not remember when there was such a concentration around one small town. So what he's talking about is in Pokrovsk direction, there is this town of Seledove, this one right over here. And this town of Seledove, because Russia was advancing towards Pokrovsk really, really fast. They were able to capture like one town after another, and they were moving forward. But then Ukrainians got an additional brigade into the mix to help prevent Russian further advances and delay them, so they can prepare additional fortifications and so on. And Selidova, instead of standing there for 2 days, it was protected for over 2 weeks, which is incredible. And it was one of the main reasons why Russia has actually shifted a lot of their efforts towards the south. And here, together with the Russian breakthrough from the south, they again are now closing this pocket. People are discussing, oh my God, Russia is capturing villages in this area. But I want to be very, very clear. So in this area, Ukraine is already in a very bad position. Like the defenses that held this pocket from being captured, they already are more or less failed completely. So right now, Ukrainians already are, like the command already understands that this area, it's very hard to defend it, and it's going to be very costly. At the same time, with which they fought for Selidova and further movements of the enemy troops allow us to make a logical forecast. They will storm the Pokrovsk-Mirnograd agglomeration. Why? I don't know. There is no logic here. Their losses near Selidova are so great that the military curs themselves are horrified. It is obvious that assaults on such a large agglomeration as Pokrovsk will cost even more. So remember, he talks about the army corps plus a tank brigade. It's a lot of people and a lot of mechanized vehicles just to capture one small town of Selidova. Pokrovsk is many times over that. The main task is to block the Pokrovsk-Konstantinovka highway, but this task has already been accomplished, and yet they will push on Pokrovsk. It seems that the military was not given the floor here, and the goals are purely political, which is again underscoring what I just said, that it is for Putin's benefit to try to undermine and try to sell this notion that like Russia is this unstoppable force. Fighting continues in Chasiv Yar and Donetsk. Despite the pessimistic forecast, and those forecasts, if you follow this channel, were there, the occupiers have nothing to brag about there. They barely are advancing. At the same time, the armed forces of Ukraine even turned the tides in Donetsk, which is true. Some of the parts of the city, the districts, have been recaptured by the Ukrainian armed forces. And it's from there that the forces are transferred to Khurakova. So what he's talking about is he's saying that before Russia was concentrating forces on this area, but at some point they wanted to attack kind of in many different directions. They wanted to attack here. They also wanted to attack Donetsk. They also wanted to attack a little bit to the north around Liman. And what he's telling you is that Ukrainians are able to recapture Donetsk, what's happening right over here. So if I zoom out a little bit, from right over here, Russians actually pulled units from Donetsk axis to kind of reinforce their main points of attack. Again, Russian area of operation is narrowing. They are running out of resources. The only options for the occupiers of the Donetsk region have been and remain unchanged. And I have been writing about it for a year now. This is an offensive in the Liman direction. So what he talks about is that while Russians try to kind of capture this area right over here towards Pokrovsk, which is what they're doing right now, this is a stupid effort because Pokrovsk, major urban area, really hard to attack. And then there is Slovyansk, Kramatorsk, and Konstantinivka. Like these three settlements, they make like a big urban chain of like buildings, basically big city, like very, very closely united. So even if Pokrovsk is captured, this does not allow any major advances towards the main part of the Donbass, because this is the main fortress of Donbass. And what he talks about, that actually, they are supplied from the north over here where the Izium is. So this is where the Ukrainian supplies are coming. So I'm just going to color it blue just so you notice. This is the supply route of Ukrainians. So if Russians will decide to move through Pokrovsk and then from south to attack that major part of the Donetsk area where that major hub, the absolute stronghold of Ukrainians are, just in this region. Again, Russia is fighting for one region, just one region of many in Ukraine. Now, if they try to do this, it's a stupid, futile endeavor. What he's telling you is that there's going to be plenty of supplies, there's going to be fight for every square centimeter of that area, and it's going to be a bloodbath for Russian, costing it incredible amounts. So the only way to undercut it is for Russians to actually attack from there to Liman, take Liman, then control this area, and then cut the supply road, and only then this push from the south makes actual sense. From talking about what's happening with different settlements, what's happening with different local defense positions, and explains that in strategic sense, nothing really changed for Russia. What they're doing is very, very local. It's not bringing them major strategic benefit. The main thing about the argument they don't give a damn about the losses, I agree. They do not spare people at all. But there is not enough people. They themselves admitted that since the beginning of summer, they have been losing many more months that they have been recruiting. The North Korean does not decide here anything. North Korean troops will not be able to sway it. For understanding, an objective assessment of the occupiers' losses in October is 40,000+ troops. They recruited less than 20,000. Fewer and fewer people want to sign in contract. Criminals are being driven by force, but they are running out. Once again, 40,000 a month. That's incredible losses. All territorial advances of Russia are now provided by their only tactics. The glide bombs and endless infantry assaults in small groups. Yes, there is results on the maps, but not a strategic one. And I wrote about the losses above. How long will their forces and resources last? Calculate for yourself. Will a large mobilization help? Unlikely. The quality of reinforcements is too low, so they will lose thousands more near Pokrovsk, and if we hold the Liman direction, and we will hold it, they will not be able to take the Donetsk region by the end of 2024. They will never succeed. Their resources will not last longer than 2025. Now, this is a broad speculation. I'm still factoring in that Russia will try to do a lot of the negotiations with allies and try to get more resources for their side. But generally speaking, he is true. 2025 is indeed a devastating year. And you don't need to listen to me or the Ukrainian guy and so on. Listen to the fucking Russians. So we don't always talk on this channel for what the Russian propagandists are saying, but they're stating exactly the same thing. The author of the Z channel, Voyenkor Kotyonok, once again implores Russian propaganda to stop exaggerating the successes of the Russian army. It must be said that his words equally apply to individual authors from the anti-war side, and so on. For example, Yulia Latina, who writes text about the fact that the defeat of Ukraine is scheduled for literally tomorrow. Yes, you know, this narrative, the propaganda narrative that Ukraine is about to lose. And so this Z propagandists, the absolute worst of the guys, he writes, we have an absolutely inadequate assessment of the military situation in Ukraine. And in the media, unfortunately, the tone for the distortion of the information background and often disinformation was set even before the start of the special military operations, so-called, by the official security agencies in the form of some talking heads with general stars, yada yada. These reports were broadcast almost daily. When summing up the indicators and figures, it turned out to be almost complete destruction of the armed forces of Ukraine. At this rate, we beat the enemy personnel several times over. So he's talking about that the Russians are reporting that they are winning Ukraine many times over, that Ukrainians have no sustainable ability to sustain this. But he writes, this flow has echoed numerous talk shows on TV channels and so on and so on and so on. Demilitarization of the enemy was elevated to the rank of an obligatory everyday phenomenon to such extent that people have forgotten how to separate truth from fiction. And now, with the offensive of the Russian armed forces in Donetsk region and how for the Ukrainian armed forces near Kursk, the media and some leaders of opinion have already begun babbling that the Ukrainian armed forces front has collapsed, that the supply of weapons, equipment, and ammunition by the West is nearing its end for a number of reasons. In a month or two, the enemy will have no one and nothing to fight with and capitulating in common. The others are already tormented by doubting about whether to give Lviv to the Poles. Again, you might hear these talking points from your local media representatives. Absolute propaganda nonsense. And what he's writing there is this, that the enemy defenses has not fallen apart. Nothing has disappeared, has not caved in. The enemy is retreating west of Donetsk in a number of areas on the thinnest, but holding on. They're retreating in organized manner. Foreign deliveries of weapons to the armed forces of Ukraine have changed, but continue and will continue even despite the possible changes to the top officials of the United States. That is true. There is a lot more coming for the Ukraine. And moreover, after Kamala Harris, I'm hoping, wins the United States elections, we're going to see more and more support for the Ukrainian side, because a lot of people are now kind of holding their breath to see if Donald Trump will win, and really hoping that it will allow them to stop sending help to Ukraine, because then they will be able to say, well, Donald Trump doesn't want to, why should we? But if Kamala is elected, then suddenly more help to Ukraine will come anyway. Kyiv is no longer has Cyclopean reserves, but units and formations abroad are preparing. The commanders-in-chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Syrskyi, gave the orders to transfer units undergoing combat coordination from above to the front. The enemy is raking out the male population from the bins of Ukraine and is ready to put the Hitler youth and female units into action. Well, this is a little bit of fun fiction for you here, what Russians are thinking, but the point still stands. Ukraine still has reserves. I know you really want to believe that Ukraine is completely running out of manpower. That is not true, okay? We talked many times that Ukraine has additional brigades. These brigades are being now prepared. There is issues in the Ukrainian military, and again, we're going to talk about those. But the point is, Ukrainians are not running out of manpower. Ukrainians have issues with how well that manpower is trained, how well that manpower is equipped. But there are people that are still fighting for Ukrainian side. It's not without issues, but they are. And I talk about this equipment problem on the Russian side all the time. And again, I'm going to leave a link to this thread by Just Because from Shitter. And he goes again and he looks into the BMPs. And he talks about that this is really big problem. And there's been Excel spreadsheets that I talked about in previous videos, explained you data that I'm taking my assessments from. Russian army was built on a Soviet legacy, and that Soviet legacy is enormous. It's huge, but it is not endless. And the end is nearing it. And the problem of Russia is that the way that they're fighting, they cannot fight if they don't have this endless supply of equipment. We're talking about maybe North Korea, maybe Iran is going to help Russia somehow. But let's be very, very clear. No military in the world, maybe if China, but China doesn't want to do it. China already says that they will kind of support Russia with selling them this dual purpose equipment, but China has a lot of economic problems, so they cannot afford fully go all in, like full blown military aggression. So China is not providing any significant support to Russia. They're barely drip feeding them some technologies, maybe some drones, but it's very minimal. And for Russia to sustain the way that they're fighting, they would need to basically have the ability to just dip into Chinese stockpiles and just take whatever they want. They cannot do it, they're not allowed to do it, and they will not be allowed to do it. I'm pretty sure about this because the pressure on China is pretty big. This, however, is going to run out. And if there's not going to be a surrender until the next week, then Ukraine, at some point, this huge army that is moving along and fighting again just in one region of Ukraine, just in one region, will end up. And talking about the problems of Ukrainian military, because there are problems. I'm going to reference this, the Stanislav Bunyatov, I believe. He's a fighter for the Ukrainian Armed Forces. I cannot show you his text here, so I cannot translate, but I written them out and translated them. So he writes about the issues in the Ukrainian military, the actual issues, not the made-up issues that we get to hear from all of the different Western media analysts. He writes that right now, but there is a way how to help reform the Ukrainian armed forces operations, and that's in his vision. And this is ideas worth discussing. I'm not talking about these ideas because I think it's for Ukraine to discuss. But what I want to say is that there are issues and there are already solutions for these issues. So it's going to take time to implement that when they comes, if it comes, and hopefully it will comes. But this is the solutions that, for example, are proposed. So he states that a lot of the newly formed units are ineffective. So instead, he proposes disband the ineffective units and transfer the personnel into the more effective units, because more effective units, they just sustain major casualties and they need reinforcement, and that reinforcement is not coming into the units, but instead is being formed into new brigades. He talks about the transfer of equipment from these newly formed brigades to the older brigades. He talks about transfer of the defense forces to the divisional system. This is something that's been underscored by many high-ranking military personnel, that Ukraine needs a division-based system, because right now Ukraine operates brigade-powered system, and this doesn't allow to coordinate the activities of large number of units to more effectively strike. Now, I don't fully agree with this, because I've read plenty of analysts that talk about that new units must be formed, that if we want to have like some kind of a new type of army and so on, they need to be made in new units, that even if you supply people to the older units, then you will not be able to go on the offensive, for example. You will only be able to fight on defensive. So there is counterpoints to this to evaluate, but it's good proposals. Then he talks about the fortifications, major issues. Ukrainian fortifications have been reported while they're there, the way that they're built and maintained is not viable. What they're doing essentially is that they have local contractors within certain areas, and there's very flimsy quality controls. So instead, he proposes that there should be separate responsibles for specific parts of the front line, for the first, second, and third line of defense to be built. And those would be the people responsible if there are problems with quality. He says that there should be clear deadlines for the construction of these fortifications. There should be, more importantly, penalties, because right now there is none. And he wants to make sure that there is a compliance with the anti-tank, anti-personnel mining norms, and basically increase more quality of these fortifications and control. There you go. Two problems that he underscores. That there is a bit of a uncertainty about the distribution of resources within Ukrainian military and the quality of command. And there is a bit of an issue with, well, it's not a bit, it's a big issue. It's a big part of the issues on the Ukrainian front line. And, oh yeah, and he mentions this point over here, that there should be a new system for how to rotate the units, because Ukrainian forces have been caught during the rotation when one unit comes to change the other unit, and Russians was using it as a window for attack, and it was really devastating for Ukrainians. So a lot of issues for Ukraine are there, but they need to be assessed constructively, without yelling that, oh my God, the front is falling apart, everything is bad. Why Zelensky is not digging trenches on the Ukrainian front line. Thank you so much for watching. I still have plenty of things to talk about, so the next video is coming out shortly. Please support the Ukrainian armed forces. We're doing great. Slava Ukraini, I love you, and I'll see you next time.